Well, good morning. It is good to be with you this week. I and a group of 13 other individuals were in Haiti last Sabbath, out in a little remote grass hut village, delivering 6,500 meals that you all put together. Yeah. And I can assure you that those meals will fill and feed more than 6,500 people, because I assumed when we put those meals together, those meals were single-serving meals. You take your bag, you add your 1 or 2 cups of hot water, you let it sit for a moment, and you eat a meal. I discovered those little bags will be 10 or 15 and maybe even 20 meals as they take a scoop out of those bags, add it to a big pot of rice, and try to fill their bellies on that day. So thank you again, New Hope, for giving us the privilege of completing the circle and of delivering food to some people who desperately need it. And I was talking to somebody else this morning who's been on the trip, and they said, what an odd contrast to be at New Hope this morning and have all this food that's here and more that will come in here a little bit later. Surrounded by all this stuff and surrounded by grocery stores and surrounded by meals, 3 meals a day or 2 meals if you're on some kind of diet, whatever your kind of thing is, to think surrounded by all that and think back to where we were last week. And that's not to say to try to make us feel guilty, make us feel bad, to make it feel like we're not doing enough. It's just simply a reality. Reality that you and I are blessed. Even if we don't feel like we're blessed, we are blessed. So again, thanks for being part of those meals and for the upcoming ones and a chance to go down and represent not just New Hope, but to represent Jesus to those communities, and especially to a group of 60-plus kids and over 13 staff members who work at the orphanage that we were privileged to spend almost a week at. So again, you'll be hearing more about that. In fact, I want to invite everybody who was on the mission trip last week to stand up for just a moment. Yeah, take all the time you want standing up, right? I know there's more than Dave Wooster. Where's everybody else? There's a couple in the back, all right. If you see Jeff Hart, talk to Jeff Hart. He has a great story, all right? You don't want to miss Jeff's story, right, Dave? But if you see these people stand up, go talk to them. They are more than happy to share those stories. So thanks again for going down. Hey, we're in this series this month called Gratitude. And it's this reality that, the whole idea of gratitude, we all feel grateful at times. And there's something that feels good about feeling good and feeling grateful. But we also recognize that gratitude is more than just feelings, because feelings, while they make you feel good, they don't always necessarily do much with that. And so today we're going to go back to a story that Jesus tells that has a crystal clear message. In fact, it's one of Jesus' more kind of harsh messages. But it speaks to gratitude, and it speaks to the way we see world, and the way that sometimes, as Jesus often does, challenges us to see things and to think about things in a different way. In fact, there's a quote that a guy named Stephen Covey he was a hot author about 20 years ago now, Sam, and wrote this book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Went, worldwide bestseller. But he has this great quote in that book. It says this: "We see the world not as it is, but as the way we are, or as we are conditioned to see it, or as we've been taught to see it." And we all recognize that's a true statement. This is not a religious statement. This is not a Christian statement. This is just a statement statement. This is a thing. I mean, you can't look at our politics and not recognize we see the world not as it is, but in the way we are, right? And the divisions and all the pressures and things. It's just a reality out there. And it's a reminder that sometimes the way we see things isn't necessarily the way things really are, but maybe it's not that thing as much as it's us and our filters that we see through. And so often Jesus talked about this idea. In fact, the Bible talks about this idea. being born again, of repenting, and sometimes we've picked up this idea that repentance is a bad thing, and it's actually a very, very good thing. Because repentance simply means changing our direction, and in that process of changing our direction, it's about changing our hearts, get it right here, Mike, and our minds. And have you ever been in one of those situations where you discovered that something that you always thought was true was not true? I just had this a couple of weeks ago. I decided I'd take one of those DNA tests. Anybody else take one of those DNA tests? You know, you spend the money. I went on eBay because I got it real cheap, and I sent it in. And I've known my whole life that I'm German. My last name is Speegle. I heard stories from my great-grandfather that, you know, it was like his grandfather. His grandfather and a couple of uncles came over from Germany years ago. They were all named Speegle. They get to coming through Ellis Island, and as they're writing it down, somebody makes a mistake on the spelling of one version. That's my version. The other ones are the regular spelling, and they went to different parts of the country. My part of that party went to Tennessee, and that's where all the Speegles came from. That's been my story. Even though my mom has some other stuff, has some German and English, I was told I was German. How can you not be with a name like Speegle? I got my test back a couple weeks ago. You know what I discovered? Yeah. Sandy said I'm African American. Not quite, but I wasn't German, which was a shock to me. In fact, I haven't talked to my mom about it yet. She just got back from a trip. I've been all over the place, so it'll be an interesting conversation when I have with her. But in fact, I called my brother up who's done some ancestry stuff in our family, and I said, have you done one of these DNA tests yet? And he's like, no, I've been doing the genealogy stuff. And I said, well, you may want to do it. Because you find out something which changes your whole view, and you've probably had this in cases, right? You've always heard from your parents or heard from somebody, this is the way it was, and you discover later, oh no, that's not how it is. But sometimes when we see a different view of stuff, it helps a new view of stuff. It actually helps us not just understand things better, sometimes it helps us live in a different way. And that's what this whole story is about with Jesus here, as he talks about the message we're going to look at today. But before we get in there, let's pray one more time together, all right? Lord, you know how easy it is and how good it feels to feel gratitude. To stop when we're forced to stop, or when we take the time to stop and think about all the things that we're grateful for. But I know just for myself that sometimes that gratefulness doesn't go any farther. And I think of, if I share that gratefulness or I do it in a tangible way, I'm going to have less, or I won't have enough. And my prayer for myself today is, as I look together with this group of people at the story that your son told thousands of years ago, that it would have the same impact on me and on us that it did to the crowd 2,000 years ago. That we would be caught off guard as well, because oftentimes that's the only way that we'll stop and think. So we ask you to enter this space this morning. And more important than just this space, we actually ask that you enter our hearts and our minds and help us do some repenting. In your name, amen. If you want to follow along, we're going to be over in Luke chapter 12. And the backstory is Jesus is teaching and he's preaching, and he's been talking about what it looks like to be his follower. And he's been telling people, you can't be ashamed of me. You're going to be stuck in situations where you're going to have to say, I'm not ashamed of Jesus. And if you are, it's not going to go good. You just need to stand up. Don't worry about it. You'll find out what you need to say in those moments. And as he's doing this teaching, somebody in the crowd shouts something to him. I don't know whether there's this argument that breaks out, this disturbance between him and a sibling, but somebody in the midst of Jesus teaching yells out at Jesus and says, "Teacher, tell my brother to give me my inheritance." Right in the middle of Jesus preaching. You can imagine if I'm up here talking and somebody steps up and said, "Mike, tell them to give me my inheritance." I love Jesus' answer. He says simply this: what makes you think that's my job? You know, and in that culture, they would come to a rabbi, a respected teacher, and they would do more things than just teach. They would be asked questions. They would be, given the ability to sort of judge on matters. And Jesus says, no, I don't know where you get this idea. That's not kind of why I've come. And then Jesus turns back to the crowd because it's been all disrupted, and he says these words. He says, listen, group, be careful and guard against all kinds of greed. That's what he says to the crowd if they've heard this brother say, hey, my brother's sticking it to me on our inheritance. He's not giving my part. Jesus says, guys, everybody, you need to be careful. This is important. You need to be careful and guard yourself. It's easy to get caught up in greed. It's easy to be caught up, my rights. I'm owed that. I deserve that. That's mine. It's supposed to be divided up. Be careful of all that stuff. And then Jesus says something very important. Life is not measured. It does not consist of how much one owes. Which is very counter-culture, right? Because our world tells us, oh, no, life is made up about what one owes, right? You ever notice when you get a new car, you are glad to park it out front and wash it all the time? And you want the neighbors as they walk out to go, ooh, you got a new car, huh? And you kind of go, yeah, thought I'd get something, or when you got your toys, you got your stuff, you want to let everybody know you got this stuff. Look what I got. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel like we've accomplished something. Jesus says we need to recognize that life isn't measured. It doesn't consist on simply how much we have. That if we believe it does, it will change the way we see things, the way we live our lives, the way we engage with life. And that's dangerous, he says, because you need to guard against this pull of greed. And greed isn't just simply wanting everything and wanting more and more and more. It's part of that, but it's also something much bigger and something much deeper. In fact, I think Jesus' definition is simply this: that greed is the assumption that more will fix our problems. You ever think about that? If I just had some more, all my problems would go away. I could pay off this debt, and that debt, and that debt, and those credit cards that are maxed out, and get my student loan paid off after all these years, right? If I just had some more, all this would fix everything. Well, let's be honest. We have heard the old statement that money doesn't buy happiness, and all of us say, I know it doesn't, but I would sure like to try, right? Yeah, right? I mean, it makes sense, If I have the option between the two, I'll give it a shot. But Jesus says, no. The assumption more will fix it. And the greed is that what we have is ours, which is the answer to this guy who says, hey, this is mine. And Jesus saying, hold it here. Greed partly is saying, what I have is ours. What mine is mine. And then Jesus does something that he oftentimes does as he's talking to people. Luke will tell us that he tells a story, a parable, a teaching story. Parables have simply one point to them, and this one you will not miss what the point is. In fact, I hope that for those of you that aren't religious, maybe this is your first time ever in a church, you're not a Christian, I hope that you'll understand that this, again, is not just a religious thing. It's about how we live our lives, and it's adds some value as a Christian. There's some different perspective on this, and it plays into who God asks us to be as we're following him. But even if you're not religious, this makes sense. In fact, if Jesus tells a story, you're going to think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So here's the story that Jesus tells. He says there's this rich guy who's got some land, and he has a good crop. And it's not just he grew a good crop, he grew a really good crop. Rich guy, plants some stuff, good crop. And this year it's an abundance crop. And Jesus says, the guy thinks to himself, what will I do? I have no place to keep all my crops. What am I going to do with all the extra I have? What am I going to do with the stuff that I didn't expect? What am I going to do with this? Whoa, it's not just a little bit of a raise this year, not just a little bit of Christmas bonus. This is a big thing. What am I going to do with all this? And what would you do with it? What would you do with it if you were this guy? And so Jesus says the guy thinks to himself, he says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and other goods. I've got so much extra that I'm gonna figure out a way to keep all this extra because, man, this is gonna be great. Because then I can say to myself, that is my soul, I have enough good things stored to last for many years. Which makes sense, right? I mean, if you got a big extra thing and you're getting closer to retirement, you kind of go, I maybe better put this away for a rainy day or for a lot of rainy days. And then he says, I can say to myself, rest, that is, take it easy. Eat a little food, drink a little, and just simply enjoy life. Not just enjoy it, to celebrate, to be merry, to have that kind of retirement that, you know what, after all these years and all my effort and all the time I put in, that I so richly deserve. I mean, it's a story that makes sense to us, right? What do you do when extra comes into your life? You figure out a way to store that extra, right? You figure out a way to where to put all that extra. In fact, I'm guessing that for some of you, you had this opportunity to think about this and actually experience this within the last probably couple of months. Because you had your summer clothes, and you needed to make room for your, right? So you got to find some place for the summer clothes to go. Now maybe you're just disorganized and everything you pulled out of this one closet, you threw it all together in there. Some of you have organized enough that you have your containers that have on the sides what they are: summer clothes, winter clothes, right? Hats, scarves, boots, jackets, sweaters, shorts, t-shirts, tank tops, flip-flops. You got it all organized. Where do I put my extra? What do I do with all this stuff? And Jesus says, here's this guy. He's a rich guy. And he gets more. And he's got so much more, he's got to figure out what to do. And so he says, hey, I'm going to tear down, I'm going to build it big, because then I can just sit back and life is going to be good. I'm going to be secure. Everything's going to be set for me. I have nothing to worry about. And it all sounds reasonable. It's all kind of what we would think. Most of us, that's how we would think. And then Jesus says this. But God, in this story, Jesus says, God talks to him. God says to the man, foolish man. Which, by the way, I don't think anybody ever wants to hear God say to them, right? You know, I'm disappointed in you. I want you to think differently. But to say foolish, it's kind of harsh. But God says, foolish man. Tonight, your life, that is your soul, will be taken, and actually the literal word is demanded back from you. This idea that your life, my life, all of our lives aren't ours in a sense, but they're demanded back from the one who's sort of given us life. God says, foolish man, tonight it's going to happen. So, because that's what's going to happen, who will get those things that you prepared for yourself? All this money and time you've gone into getting all this stuff set up so you could sit back and have a great life. Who's going to get it now? And then Jesus, so that we don't miss the point of what he's just taught in the story, says these words. Actually, before he says that, let me just remind you. God wasn't angry with the guy because he had a good year. And God wasn't angry with the guy because he was a rich guy either, all right? He's not angry because he's rich. He's not angry because he had a really good year. He's angry because he missed whose stuff it was and why he had received it. That's why he says, foolish man. He's forgotten whose all this stuff is and why he had gotten it in the first place. Just because it's given to me doesn't mean it's for me. And I'm going to invite you now to say those words with me. Because some of you probably remember back when you were a child or when you've seen other children do this. And they said, share your toys. And you said, no, it's, whoa, calm down, all right? Mine. No, share your toys, right? You know, sharing's good, and parents work at that. We try hard with our kids to kind of put that in their DNA, and we discover that when they get older, yeah, it didn't stick, right? So all together now, with conviction, so we only have to do it once, all right? Just because it's given to me doesn't mean because we all make that assumption, don't we? If it's mine And have I been given to me? It must be mine. It must be for mine. And here's what Jesus says so we don't miss the point. How that story goes for this rich guy who has this extra stuff and doesn't know what to do with it. This is how it will be for those who store up things, that is wealth or treasure, for themselves, and are not rich towards that, as in what matters to God. Now, if this is your first time in a church, you're thinking, I'm not sure I want to come back. Because that's kind of harsh, right? I mean, the guy seemed like a reasonable guy. He's a rich guy, and apparently God's not mad with that, but his idea that he gets a really great year, and it kind of makes sense. And then Jesus says, whoa, this is how it's going to be. I mean, it's like, it's just when you think you have it made, it all is going to go away. But even if you're not a Christian, I want you to understand the principle of this. Because we all know the power of more in our lives. The promises more makes. And we all know the letdown that we've had with more. And the cost of more. I mean, have you ever sat back and thought to yourself, I sure wish my life was much more simple? Because when I had less stuff, even though I was much poorer and, I was hoping I could make it to my next paycheck, always be what's in the cupboard, not much, but life was simpler and I didn't have so many things to take care of. Didn't have to worry about parking more than one vehicle because all I had was one vehicle. I didn't have to worry about where I was putting my summer clothes when it was winter because I just had enough to fit in one closet. See, it's not what you have. It's what you do with what you have. And that's the question Jesus is driving. It's not what we have. It's what we're going to do with it, what we've done with it, and what we're going to do with it. And that's always the question Jesus has for us. What are you doing with what you have? See, life is not defined by what you have, even when you have a lot. And the reality is, everybody in this room and everybody listening online, you have a lot. In fact, everybody in this room is rich, even though you don't feel like rich, and even when I say those words, you think, oh, Mike, you have no idea. Rich? Man, I'm barely making it. But let me ask you some questions. If you get a stand in front of your closet at home, did you have an option this morning of what outfit you might wear to church today, or do you just have simply one choice? Have you ever traded in a perfectly good car for a perfectly new car? You ever stood in one of those long phone lines, texting or talking or playing some game on your perfectly good phone so you could trade it in on the newest one? See, we all have rich people problems. And being rich is not bad, okay? Jesus wasn't mad at the guy in the story. God wasn't mad at the guy in the story because he was rich, all right? He was rich before he got the extra. That wasn't Jesus' point. It wasn't about being rich. It's about what do you do when you have extra? What do you do when you have more? And our problem is we don't think of ourselves as rich. In fact, Gallup did a poll fairly recently, and they asked people, what would it take to consider yourself rich? And consistently across the board, no matter how little or much somebody made, it was always roughly about double what they made. So if you make $30,000 a year, they said to be rich would be to have $60,000 a year. I was making 30, I would shot higher, but that's what they shot for, all right? But so if you're making 60, you're thinking, if I could bring home 120, I'd probably consider myself rich. Not stinking rich, but I feel pretty good, right? 120, 240. They polled people whose net worth that bring home $5 million a year. You know what they said would make them feel rich? $10 million. It was consistent across the board, and what that tells us is this idea of wealth is a moving target. And none of us believes when we have a lot. But it hasn't defined our life. And let's be honest. For a lot of us, our lives are defined by what we have. For a lot of us, it's why we have what we have. I mean, have you ever spent money on something you couldn't afford simply so you would not look out of place or feel out of place, or so that when you went back to your 10 or 15 or 20-year high school reunion, you could stick it in their face, show them you were successful, even though you were driving a rental car, though it was a Cadillac. You were in a nice suit or a nice dress, but you hadn't taken off the tag because it was going back Monday. Stuff defines us. And the reality is God's biggest competitor for my heart and for your heart is my stuff and is your stuff. Because some of you are wired like me. And for me, having money in the bank brings me security. Part of it's how I was raised, back to that Stephen Covey quote. I see the world through those lenses my parents taught me. My parents were big on, not borrowing a lot of money, saving up money before you bought something, all these things that we would call good principles. The problem with all those good principles is they make you think about money a certain way. And my stuff becomes my security, and the problem when my stuff becomes my security is that I forgot who really is my security. And the stuff I put my security in can disappear pretty rapidly. Somebody can steal it. Stock market could crash. Lose my job. Though I hope not. But the biggest competitor for my heart and for your heart is our stuff. And the other part of our stuff is not just the security, how it makes us feel, because we feel good when we have that stuff. We feel like we're successful. We feel like we've accomplished something. The other part of it is that it becomes a distraction. I mean, we have to get insurance on all of our stuff. As far be it from us, somebody comes and takes some of that stuff. So we have to cover it, and then we have to keep it up, and we got to keep it maintained so it keeps its value, and we got to watch where it's at, and we have to store it, and that's why, I used to have a 3-car garage. I didn't have one of my operating cars in any stall in my 3-car garage. It was my storage unit. My son had a car in there that needed work. I had a car in there that needed work. I don't know what all the other stuff was. We just had a bunch of stuff. But you got to take care of it. You got to watch over it, and it becomes a distraction. The more stuff we have, the more possibility to be distracted. And that's why our stuff is God's chief competitor for our hearts. That's what Jesus said when he started this story. When somebody said, "Hey, Jesus, help me out here. Tell my brother to get me what's mine." And Jesus said, "I don't think that's my job." Who told you that was my job? My job is to remind all of us that Jesus said to be careful about how greed can attach itself to our lives. And greed is not defined by your W-2 form. It's not defined by how little you may have. Greed is an equal opportunity attacker. And it's always there. I mean, we're surrounded with it, right? You can't open a magazine, a newspaper, turn on the TV, listen to the radio without being told, if you just had this, life would be so good, right? Because these tennis shoes will make you run faster and jump higher. I discovered shoes don't make you jump higher. That's not the key to making you jump higher. Something above the shoes that do that, right? But at least I look good when I'm still only jumping this high. See, gratitude isn't being thankful for what I have had, or will have. It's recognizing who gives it all to me and whose it all is. Because when Jesus says in that story that God says, you know what, tonight it's coming back to me. Tonight I'm demanding your life back to me. His point is this rich guy who was rich by God's blessing, his point is all that stuff happens and it's all somebody else's, because he says when it's all done, it's not yours anyways. And the huge change that Jesus talked about so much. In fact, Jesus talked more about money than he did anything else. Do you know that? Which ought to tell us something about the importance of this. But you know what you have is not yours? It's not the government's either, by the way. So that'll be some good news. If you're not feeling any good news there, that's some good news, right? It's not the government's either. What you have is simply yours to use, yours on loan, yours to manage. It's not something you own. Because when you're dead and gone, somebody else is going to get to manage it, wisely or unwisely. Love this quote. I don't know who made it. That's why it says unknown at the bottom. If you are more fortunate than others, build a longer table, not a taller fence. Wouldn't that be great to have that kind of approach to life? What I have has been given to me by God's grace, whether I have a lot of zeros or not so many zeros. God just decided this is what it is. And maybe this is just his trust of me. Maybe this is a test of me. This is not about being rich. Jesus, again, God in the story is not mad because the guy's rich. And throughout the Bible story, you have all these stories of people being rich, people being dirt poor. There is no differentiation. That has nothing about God's love, care for any of those things. It's just how it happens. And God puts this much here and this much here, and he spreads it all out. But his hope in spreading this all out is that we'll build walls, that will protect ourselves, that will keep ourselves safe and secure from any kind of worry. That we see what we have, and especially the extra we have, as something to share with others, something to bring food to them, to sit and have a relationship with them. So let's wrap it up this way. What would it take for you to be grateful in a way that changed how you live? What would it take for you to let the gratitude you feel, and this week you will probably sit down on Thursday. Some of you will sit with a big group of people, some of you a small group of people. Some people have these traditions. You go around the table, they'll say, what are you grateful for, right? If you don't know what it is, it's the mashed potatoes, it's the gravy, it's that kind of stuff, right? Or family, friends, whatever you think. You go around, you feel good that you had a chance to say something. Because gratitude feels really good. But what if you took that good feeling and actually got embedded in your life into a way where you began to live a grateful life all the time? Not just at Thanksgiving time. What would it take for you to be grateful in a way that changed how you live? And it may be a more important question. Would it be worth finding out? Finding out what that might look like. And if it is, then my response would to you to simply be this. Keep your hands open. Keep your eyes wide open and listen for God. Hands open. Everybody, hands open. Eyes open, right? And listen for God. If you'll do that and make that choice this week, especially this is a perfect time with Thanksgiving, but going forward, you will discover what it means to invite God into your life, to be grateful, to say, God, everything I have is yours, and I'm thankful that I have some stuff, and you're not mad because I go on vacation. You're not mad that I'm saving for retirement. You're not mad about any of those things. You just want me not to forget that when I get extra, that maybe the extras come to me not because I've done a really good job or my company's done a good job or I hit the lottery, woo. But maybe I've gotten extra because somebody needs that extra to just meet what they need today. If you'll do that, your life will change. And your gratefulness will change because now it will no longer simply be a good feeling. It'll be some good actions that go with it.